Let's talk about graded exposure in strength, powerlifting, exercise, getting out of pain, all of those things. So the general premise of graded exposure is that someone is experiencing something that they are either fearful of or in pain. And in the rehab world, that is typically, there's a combination of the fact that you are having pain makes you a little bit more afraid to perform a certain activity. So things that cause us pain are innately fearful. And that's because a lot of these things overlap, right? Pain is a biopsychosocial phenomenon, meaning it is a biological safety mechanism. It's also a psychological thing. We are, intrinsically governed by our mind, right? And pain is processed through the brain. The mind and the brain are not the same thing per se, but learning to understand that there are psychological aspects of pain can actually be really helpful with getting ourselves moving in the right direction. And then there's large social constructs around pain. So much of the fear associated with pain really comes down to the fact that we've been ingrained to fear it, both positively, but also a lot of times negatively, right? And there's even more to pain than just kind of the biopsychosocial construct. We're understanding more and more about how pain is linked to our attention, how anxiety and depression, which are psychological issues, are contributors to pain and pain back to them, right? But going back to what graded exposure is and what graded exercise is and where they overlap and maybe where they differ. The big thing to remember is that we always want to establish a baseline for where we can start, right? We also want to assess where people's beliefs are at any given time when we start to implement something like graded exercise, graded exposure. We want to know where people are at. So fears, beliefs, and some of these psychological and psychosocial issues need to be teased out in order to find an appropriate starting point. In the powerlifting and strength training world, so much of it really boils down to, people don't want to regress. People want to feel good when they're training, and they also don't want to hurt themselves more, right? So when developing and thinking about graded exposure, we want to establish a baseline of an activity that is similar to the thing we're trying to achieve in at least some form so that we can progressively build upon it. And the overarching premise of graded exposure, graded exercise is that if we regress things appropriately, we can then start to find an entry point or a floor to then build upon. And it can seem very, very simplistic and almost reductionistic, but in the rehab world and in the strength training world, there is like a complexity bias, meaning that a lot of times we want things to almost be complex because then if they're complex, it means that okay, maybe this isn't my fault, or maybe there's something out of my control. And it's not to say that it's always your fault, but a lot of times the stuff we can control and we can build upon is the most meaningful things to accomplish, or the most meaningful things to accomplish. And in its essence, graded exposure is very simple, but it's hard to implement, right? So let's go through a few examples. Say you're having shoulder pain with bench pressing, and you go to the doctor, or you hear from your buddy that it's XYZ. You're having a rotator cuff issue, or it's XYZ nerve. But you also tease out that it hurts when you hit, say, above 220 pounds. You feel it in the front of your shoulder only when you get to a certain weight, right? Or only when you've done a certain amount of work during the week that would basically start to demonstrate that you're incurring a bunch of fatigue, and then you start to have shoulder pain, right? Or it's with a full range bench press, like, a competition standard bench press, but you don't have the same issue with like a pin bench press, or you don't have it with dumbbells, but you have it with a straight bar, right? So utilizing that information and assessing people's beliefs around what's going on, we can take steps to restart and find the floor. Maybe that means, we adjust tempo, we adjust weight on the bar, we adjust range of motion. But making the adjustments that keep the task and the goals of the exercise similar allows us to make progress towards building back to standard straight bar bench press, where we, start to increase load at the level where things were painful, right? Say you're having problems with your squat. When you hit depth, you get pain in your groin. And when you're doing low bar squats is when you experience pain in your groin at, say, competition depth for powerlifting or depth for Olympic lifters. What we can do is look at the variables in play. Say you're doing competition depth, low bar back squats, and you get pain in your groin, and it hurts at every weight. You just doing the bar is painful, right? What we can tease out is, okay, so what if we do squats to parallel? Does that change your pain, and does it allow you to keep doing a meaningful task, or doing squats to a pin or squats to a box? If we do those things, if we adjust some variables and we find a new entry point that allows us to build without pain, and we can show ourselves that, oh yeah, I can still squat in a meaningful way. It may not be full range of motion, but over time, I can calm things down and then continue to build things up. And that's what we're really after. That's the underlying premise of any type of rehab, is we want to allow things to calm down and then build them up. And those two things might be a little bit simultaneous. But ultimately, what we're trying to do with any type of graded exposure, just like when we're progressively loading an exercise, is we want to manipulate the variables in such a way that allows us to make progress. And simply stated, you are trying to find the entry point or the floor for the activity that is causing you pain, and then you want to build upon it. That is all graded exposure is in its essence. There's a lot of little things you can think about and adjust inside of that framework, but it's probably one of the most meaningful ways to actually continue to train effectively and get out of pain without having to do weird rehab protocols or all sorts of goofy exercises. Graded exposure is our way of manipulating training variables to find a good starting point to continue to build upon, so that you can get out of pain, get back to training, and keep getting stronger. It's not necessarily the most complicated thing, and that's fine. It's good to find simple and useful ways to get out of pain, build strength, build confidence, and get back to where you want to go. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you have, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content like this. I'm going to continue to put out YouTube videos and just keep getting better at delivering high quality training and rehab information. All right, thanks.